The message arrived on every channel, in every language of the compact. It was not a transmission from the Cathar. They did not communicate. It was a warning, pieced together from deep space scans by 1,000 listening posts. A vast, unprecedented force was gathering, moving like a dark tide through the galaxy. Every swarm, every harvester, every hunter ship was answering a final, desperate call. Their course was a straight, unstoppable line. The target was a small, blue-white world, Earth. On the bridge of the unyielding Spirit, the crew watched the strategic map. It was a nightmare. A swirling mass of red markers, larger than any fleet ever recorded, was moving toward their home. Captain Lee Min-woo felt a cold weight in his stomach. This was it. The predators had decided to cut out the infection at its source. Time to intercept? He asked, his voice flat. Park Hannah's fingers flew across her console. They will reach the outer solar system in 72 hours. The combined compact fleet is mobilizing to meet them at the edge of the Sol system, near Jupiter. They are asking for our tactical advice. A grim smile touched Min-woo's lips. Advice. They wanted the human recipe for chaos. Tell them this. Do not form a battle line. Do not fight their war. Fight ours. Be unpredictable. Be annoying. Be everywhere at once. Your job is not to destroy them. It is to confuse them, to slow them down. Just for a little while. The next 3 days were a blur of preparation and terrible silence. As the unyielding Spirit raced home, they passed other human ships, old asteroid miners with welded-on guns, refueling stations converted into makeshift forts, swarms of drones being deployed in the dark. Earth was not waiting passively. It was bristling like an angry porcupine. The final stand would not be at Earth. It would be at Jupiter, using the giant planet and its maze of moons as a battlefield. When the unyielding Spirit arrived, the scene was both magnificent and terrifying. The glittering, ordered formations of the compact fleet waited on one side. On the other, space itself seemed to curdle as the Cathar Armada emerged from warp. It was a wall of living ships, a single unified mind burning with a new, simple purpose. Destroy the source. The battle began not with a roar, but with a whisper. As the Cathar advanced, hidden human and ground broadcast arrays hidden in the Jovian moons activated. The awful, chaotic symphony of Earth noise erupted, slamming into the hive mind. The wall of ships rippled, their advance slowing for a crucial moment. Then the chaos began. Compact ships, following human advice, broke formation. They attacked in small, fast groups, hitting the Cathar flanks and then ducking behind moons or into the planet's radiation belts. They used hit-and-run tactics, orbital slingshots, and decoys. It was not efficient, but it was infuriating. The Cathar swarm began to stretch and distort, trying to catch the stinging flies. The unyielding Spirit plunged into the heart of it. Target the lead coordinators. Min-woo ordered. The big ones with the strong hive links. Their railguns fired, punching holes in chitinous hulls. But for every ship they damaged, 10 more pressed forward. The human tricks were working, but the sheer weight of the enemy was overwhelming. Slowly, inevitably, the defensive line was being pushed back toward the inner solar system. On the main viewer, a massive shape, larger than a city, pushed its way to the front of the swarm. It was the Hive Queen vessel, the central mind of this armada. It pulsed with a sickly green light. It did not fire weapons. It simply advanced, a battering ram of flesh and will, protected by 100 smaller ships. That's it, Min-woo said softly. That's the brain. If that ship reaches Earth, it will broadcast a kill command to every living thing on the planet. Dr. Song Ji-eun finished, her voice hollow from the medical bay. A psychic scorched Earth. We have to stop it. Kim Tai-yang looked up from his station, his face lit by emergency lights. Our weapons can't get through its escort. Not in time. An idea, desperate and terrible, formed in Minwoo's mind. He looked at his crew, at Hana, who had translated their first alien signal, at Tai-yang, who kept their broken ship flying, at the memory of Kang Jun's Marines holding the line. Then we don't shoot our way in, he said. We get invited. He explained the plan. It was simple. They would pretend to be crippled. They would let the Queen ship capture them, draw them in. And they would deliver a message, not with weapons, but with data. A data bomb for the soul of the hive. The crew did not argue. They nodded. There were no other options. The unyielding spirit turned, presenting its most damaged side to the Queen vessel. It powered down its weapons, let its shields flicker and die. It drifted, a helpless piece of wreckage. As Minwoo hoped, a thick, bony boarding tube shot out from the Queen ship and slammed into their hull, locking on. This time, they did not defend. They let the Cathar warriors flood in. Sergeant Kang Jun and his remaining Marines made their final stand in the corridor leading to the bridge, not to win, but to buy seconds. Their gunfire was the last sound of human defiance before the organic seal closed over the hallway. The bridge door was cut open with acid. Cathar warriors filled the room, their clicking triumphant. Captain Minwoo, Park Hana, and Kim Tai-yang stood, unarmed, their hands raised. They were seized by cold, hard limbs and dragged through the boarding tube into the belly of the Queen vessel. The air was warm, wet, and thick with a biological smell. They were taken to a vast, pulsing chamber. In the center, a massive brain-like organ throbbed, connected by glowing tendrils to the ship. This was the heart of the hive mind for this swarm. The creatures shoved them forward before the great neural mass. The clicking reached a fever pitch, demanding, analyzing. It wanted to understand this enemy before it consumed them, to finally solve the puzzle. Park Hana, her body trembling but her voice steady, activated the small transmitter on her wrist. It was linked to the unyielding spirit's main computer. "We don't have a surrender for you," she said. "We have a gift. A history lesson." She sent the command. From the dying, unyielding spirit, a final, powerful burst transmission shot directly into the Queen ship's sensory organs. It was not a virus. It was raw, unfiltered data. The hive mind braced for an attack, for corruption. What it received was worse, that it was the endless, bloody history of human conflict, from stone axes to starships. It was the stubborn fight against plague and famine. It was the roar of volcanoes and the silent endurance of ice ages. It was the sound of mothers singing to their children in bomb shelters. It was the laughter of soldiers in the mud. It was the terrifying, beautiful, irrational will to live, to fight, to hope, even when all hope was gone. It was the story of a species that had spent its entire existence wrestling its own demons, and thus was never, ever going to bow to an outside one. The data was a tsunami of chaos, of emotion, of self. A concept the hive mind had no framework to process. The pure, focused purpose of consume was drowned in a billion contradictory signals of resist. The hive mind tried to assimilate it, to categorize it, and could not. The effort was like a crystal glass trying to hold a supernova dot in the chamber. Minwoo, Hana, and Tai-yang watched as the great neural organ began to shudder. The green light pulsed erratically. The clicking turned into a pained, discordant screech. The warriors holding them stumbled, their coordination shattered. The Hive Queen vessel stopped its advance. Then the entire swarm stopped. The battle at Jupiter froze. A wave of profound disorientation rolled out from the center. The great mind, overloaded, sought one thing: escape. To sever the connection to this poisonous, incomprehensible signal. A single panicked command echoed through every Cathar ship. Retreat, one by one, then in groups, then in a rushing flood, the Cathar ships turned. They disengaged from the battle, abandoning their wounded, and fled into the deeper black, not in formation, but in a rout. The predators were broken, not by a stronger predator, but by something they could never be, something that refused to be prey. In the silent, stinking chamber of the abandoned queen ship, the three humans stood alone. The only sound was the dying sputter of the overloaded hive organ. They found a small, old shuttle docked in an auxiliary bay, a trophy from some long-consumed race, and flew it toward the waiting compact fleet. On a repaired Illyria, Captain Lee Min-woo stood before the Galactic Compact. He wore a simple uniform, clean but mended. The faces that looked back at him were no longer filled with pity or desperation, but with a deep, wary respect. "The Cathar are gone from this sector," the Illyrian minister said. "They have not been destroyed, but you have. Changed them. You have taught them fear. The compact is saved." Min-woo shook his head. "We did not save you. We just showed you how to fight, how to be ugly and clever and stubborn. The galaxy is still dangerous, but now it knows." He looked at the representatives of a dozen species. "It knows that humanity is here, and we do not break." The pact that was signed that day was different. Humanity was not just a member. They were the shield, the ones who understood the dark. The predators had thought nothing could defeat them. They were wrong. They had met a species that had been fighting monsters, real and imagined, since it first looked up at the stars. And in that fight, humanity had found its place. Not as kings, not as conquerors, but as guardians who remembered what it was like to be afraid, and who had learned, long ago, how to turn fear into a weapon. News of what the humans had done spread through the Galactic Compact like an electric current. The Cathar swarm near the barren moon had not been destroyed. It had been crippled, left drifting and convulsing in a silent, sickened stupor. The other species did not celebrate. They watched with a mix of awe and deep unease. The humans had not won a battle. They had introduced a new kind of war. On the unyielding spirit, the mood was focused and grim. Captain Lee Min-woo stood before his senior crew in the briefing room. The faces looking back at him were tired, but their eyes were hard. They had learned a terrible truth. To survive the monsters, they had to become monsters themselves. But they were human monsters, clever and relentless. "The Cathar will adapt," Min-woo began. "Dr. Song's weapon worked because it was a surprise. They will try to find a counter. We cannot wait for them. We must make their hive mind so confused, so full of noise and pain, that it cannot think straight." Sergeant Kang Jun leaned forward. "So we hit them everywhere at once, not just with the sickness. We make every encounter a nightmare they can't predict." Park Hannah brought up a star map. "Their communications are their strength. The low-frequency clicks, the pheromone pulses. It binds them. What if we could jam it? Not block it, but poison it?" Kim Tai-yang grinned, a wild look in his eye. "I've been looking at the Compact's long-range comm arrays. We can modify them. Instead of sending a clean signal, we can broadcast noise. But not just static. We can feed them sound." "What kind of sound?" Dr. Song Ji-eun asked. "Earth sound," Tai-yang said. "The roar of old rocket launches. The buzz of chainsaws. Heavy metal music. Jungle predator calls. Baby cries. A chaotic mess of it, all layered and loud. We blast it on their frequency. It won't hurt them, but it will be a headache they can't turn off. It will drown out their own thoughts." Min-woo nodded. "It was a psychological weapon. Do it. coordinate with the compact. Set up these broadcast stations on dead moons and asteroids along their known routes. Sergeant, your turn. Kang Jun stood. My Marines have been studying the anatomy of their ships from the scans. They're like giant bugs. They have nerve clusters, major muscle groups to move their wings. I mean, their hull plates. We can't fight the whole body. We cut the tendons. He pointed to the hologram of a Cathar harvester. Small, fast boarding pods here, here, and here. We go in, plant shaped charges on these organic bindings, and get out. Not to destroy the ship, to cripple it. Make it a lame animal in the middle of the swarm. The plan was a symphony of violence, each movement designed to attack a different sense of the hive. The humans, with the compact's reluctant help, became ghosts and saboteurs. Weeks later, near a gas giant's ring system, a Cathar swarm moved to intercept a seemingly vulnerable ground mining convoy. As they approached, a hidden broadcast array on a small moon powered up. A deafening wave of sound, compressed and transmitted directly into the Cathar communication band, hit them. The swarm shuddered. The hive mind was flooded with a terrifying, meaningless cacophony. The screech of ancient earth machinery, the rhythmic pounding of tribal war drums, the dissonant scream of electric guitars. It was overwhelming nonsense. Their precise click commands were lost in the noise. Ships drifted out of formation, their movements becoming hesitant thought from within the rings of the gas giant. 3 modified human shuttles, engines muffled and heat signatures hidden, shot out. They were piloted by Kang Jun's best. They flew not like ships, but like missiles, straight for the largest Cathar vessel. They attached to the living hull like suckerfish and began their grim work. Small, focused explosions erupted along the ship's flank. Not massive blasts, but precise cuts. Thick, fibrous cables that acted as hydraulic muscles snapped and whipped. The great ship's stabilizer fin, a biological rudder, went limp. It began to list, spinning slowly, crashing into a smaller hunter ship and sending both into a tumble. The swarm, already confused by the audio attack, now saw one of its giants wounded not by weapons, but as if by a disease of the flesh. Panic, a true and unfamiliar panic, began to spread through the hive link. Elsewhere, the humans used their understanding of predator psychology against the ultimate predators. They seeded asteroid fields with debris that looked like valuable compact ore, but was laced with radiation sources that irritated Cathar senses. They left derelict drone ships floating, their holds seemingly full of biomass, only for them to be traps that filled boarding parties with corrosive foam. Every encounter was different. There was no pattern the Cathar could lock onto. One day, human ships would hit and run with kinetic slugs. The next, they would release clouds of chaff that contained irritating crystalline spores. Another day, they would simply project blinding, strobe-like light patterns at them. The Cathar hive mind was under a constant grinding assault. It was not losing ships to a superior force. It was being driven mad by 1,000 small cuts and constant jarring noise. The sickness from the biological agent had been contained by the Cathar, isolated and purged from their systems at great cost. But they could not purge confusion. They could not purge unpredictability. On the bridge of the unyielding spirit, Parkhana monitored the swarm's movements. "They're changing," she reported. "Their formations are looser. They're more cautious. They're spending as much time scanning for traps as they are advancing. They're afraid." Minwoo watched the tactical display. The red dots of the Cathar were no longer a solid, advancing wall. They were a hesitant, scattered cloud. Their predators, their confidence was their weapon. We've taken that away. Now they're just hungry animals, and hungry animals make mistakes. The final piece of the plan was the most daring. Kim Ta-yang, working with ground engineers, had studied a captured Cathar warp drive organ. It was a biological node that cheated space by secreting a specific enzyme into the cosmic fabric. "What if," Taiyang said, his hands covered in grease, "we could make that enzyme unstable, like an allergy? We can't build a bomb big enough to hurt a whole swarm, but we can make the space they travel through hurt them." Using the modified gamma rays, they began broadcasting a powerful, resonant frequency into the hyperlane nexuses the Cathar used. It was tuned to the molecular signature of their warp enzyme. The next time a Cathar swarm tried to make a faster-than-light jump, disaster struck. As their warp organs engaged, the resonant frequency interacted with the enzyme. It caused a violent, uncontrolled reaction. Space itself seemed to recoil. Several ships were torn apart from the inside as their own warp drives exploded. Others were thrown violently out of warp, crippled and stranded in the empty void between stars. The message was now undeniable. The humans were not fighting the Cathar. They were turning the universe itself against them. The water was poisoned. The ground was shifting. The very paths they walked were now treacherous dot in the deepest part of the hive mind. A new priority overrode the ancient drive to consume. It was a directive of preservation, of survival. The calculations were clear. This species, this human anomaly, represented an existential threat not through power, but through chaotic, systemic corruption. To continue was to risk the utter dissolution of the hive. The order pulsed out to all swarms, a command of last resort. All forces were to converge, not on the compact worlds, not on the resource-rich planets. Every available ship was to gather for a final, absolute assault on the source of the chaos. The target was Earth. They would drown the poison in its cradle. The predators, cornered and furious, were coming for the heart. The silence on the bridge of the unyielding spirit was heavy with loss and the sharp smell of burnt wiring. Captain Li Minwu stared at the main viewer, now showing the retreating green dots of the Cathar swarm. They weren't fleeing in panic. It was a disciplined withdrawal, a predator pulling back to reconsider a thorny piece of prey. That was more frightening than a charge. "Damage report," Minwu said. His voice rough. Park Hannah's hands moved over her console. "Hull breaches on decks 3 and 5, sealed with emergency foam. Port maneuvering thrusters are gone. Railgun 2 is offline. Its magnetic coils are fused. We have 23 dead, 15 wounded. Life support is stable, but we're running on filters." Sergeant Kang Jun's voice came through the comm, tight with anger and grief. "My Marines held the line, Captain, but their claws cut through our armor like paper. We need better tools." "Understood, Sergeant," Minwu said. He looked at Kim Taiyang, who was already pulling up schematics, his face smudged with soot. "How long to make us mobile?" Taiyang blew out a long breath. "Mobile? 2 days. Comeback ready? A week, maybe. We need parts we don't have. That spin and burn trick fried half my systems." A new signal chirped on Hana's panel. It was a tight beam message from the Galactic Compact. The Illyrian minister's face appeared, her large eyes wide with something new, a fragile hope. "Human vessel, we witnessed the engagement. Your methods were unorthodox, but you made them retreat. No one has ever done that. We request your immediate aid at the Illyria system. We will share all our technical data to repair your ship." Minwu exchanged a look with Hana. It was what they needed, but it was a trap of a different kind. "We accept your offer," he replied, "but we will not be integrated into your fleet. We fight our way." The minister bowed her head. "Agreed." The journey to the massive compact shipyard near Illyria was tense. The sight of the human ship, battered and ugly among the sleek, silvery vessels of the other species, caused a stir. Engineers and soldiers stared. The humans were a curiosity, a barely understood myth that had drawn blood from a monster, while Taiyang and his team worked day and night, integrating compact shield generators and materials into the unyielding spirit's frame. Dr. Song Ji-eun was given access to the compact's xenobiological archives. She spent hours in a sterile lab, studying every scrap of data on the Cathar. The more she learned, the colder she felt. She requested a meeting with Minwoo and the senior staff in a small briefing room. Her hologram displayed the complex, spiral structure of Cathar genetics. "They are perfect consumers," she began. "They don't just eat. They absorb. When they consume a new species, they scan for useful traits, stronger cellular structures, efficient photosynthesis, anything. They then splice those traits into their own next generation. That's how they adapt so fast." "So they're thieves," Kang Jun grumbled. "Worse," Ji-eun said. "Their system has no waste, no error. It's a closed, clean loop. They have never encountered a toxin they couldn't break down, a pathogen they couldn't assimilate and neutralize. They have no concept of what we call an immune system because they've never been truly sick." A slow understanding dawned on Minwoo's face. "You're saying we shouldn't fight them with a bigger gun. We should fight them with a disease." "Not a disease," Ji-eun corrected. "A corruption. A logic bomb for biology." She brought up another image. "Look at their hive communication. It's based on low-frequency pulses and complex pheromones. It's incredibly precise. What if we could make a noise in that system?" The plan that formed was terrifying in its simplicity. They would not attack the body of the swarm. They would attack its mind, its very way of being. With the compact's resources, Ji-eun and a team of human and Illyrian biologists worked. They did not engineer a virus to kill. Instead, they created a cocktail. It contained self-replicating nanites designed to mimic beneficial genetic code, only to scramble it during replication. It contained prions misfolded proteins that would force Cathar proteins to misfold in turn, like a chain of falling dominoes, disrupting neural functions. It contained retroviruses that would inject junk data into their cellular processes. The weapon was not deadly. It was disorienting, confusing, and corrosive to their perfect biological order. It was, as Taiyang put it, sand in the gears of a living machine. The delivery system was Kang Jun's idea. "We can't shoot it at them. Their point defense will vaporize it. We have to make them want to take it inside." So they prepared a trap. The unyielding spirit, now repaired and modified with tougher armor and more erratic thrusters, would act as bait. They deliberately weakened its shield output, let its energy signature look unstable and dying. In its cargo bays, they loaded canisters of the biological agent, hooked to pressurized air systems. The compact fleet watched, uneasy, as the human ship limped into the path of a known Cathar harvesting route near a barren moon. To any scanner, the unyielding spirit looked like a crippled prize. Leaking radiation and heat, the Cathar swarm arrived. This time, it was a larger force, a dozen ships. They surrounded the human vessel, clicking in triumph. The prey that had stung them was now helpless. The largest ship, a harvester, extended its bony boarding tubes, punching into the human ship's hull. The order was clear: consume. Assimilate any useful adaptations from this stubborn species. Inside the unyielding spirit, the crew waited in sealed environment suits. The eerie sound of Cathar claws scraping through the corridors echoed. Kang Jun and his marines watched from hidden vents as the warriors flooded the cargo bay first. Drawn to the largest open space, they're in position. Kang Jun whispered over the Minwoo on the bridge, gave the order. "Release it." In the cargo bay, the canisters hissed. A fine silvery mist filled the room. To the Cathar, it registered as interesting. Particulate matter, rich with complex organic signatures. It was part of the prey, so they inhaled it. It settled on their chitin, and their absorptive cells began to draw it in, eager to analyze the new biological data. For a few minutes, nothing happened. The Cathar warriors continued their methodical search. Then, the first one stumbled. Its clicking turned erratic, jumbled. It dropped its bladed arms, clawing at its own head. Another began to shudder violently, its limbs moving out of sync. A wave of wrongness passed through the borders. Their perfect hive link, once a river of clear information, became static, then screams. The nanites were scrambling genetic instructions. The prions were twisting neural pathways. The viruses were making cells produce useless, chaotic proteins. On the harvester ship, the hive mind experienced a sensation it had no name for. It was not pain. It was a terrifying fragmentation. Data streams corrupted. Commands from the central mind arrived garbled, or were ignored by bodies that could no longer understand them. It was madness. The Cathar boarding party collapsed, not dead, but convulsing, systems warring against themselves. The harvester ship shuddered and jerked away, its connection to its warriors a torrent of noise. The mist, leaking from the breached hull, drifted into its open docking bay. The other Cathar ships stopped their clicking. They hovered, motionless. They were witnessing the impossible. Their kin were not being destroyed. They were being broken, made unclean. The swarm's unified purpose fractured into confusion, and for the first time, something akin to fear. The unyielding spirit powered up its real engines and pulled away, leaving the confused and sickened swarm behind. On the bridge, the crew watched the scanner. The Cathar were not pursuing. Report, Minwu said quietly. Ji-yoon was monitoring the biological data. The agent is working. It's spreading through their local hive link. It's not killing them, but it's stopping them. They don't know how to fix it. Park Hannah managed a small, grim smile. They thought we were food. Now they think we're poison. Minwu looked at the stars. The predators had learned another human lesson. Some prey is not just tough to eat. It makes you sick. And now they had to decide if the meal was worth the fever. The war had just changed. It was no longer about claws and guns. It was about infection. The 3 Cathar hunter ships closed in. They moved like sharks through water, smooth and deadly. Their hulls, a patchwork of dark chitin and glowing green veins, absorbed the light from distant stars. On the bridge of the unyielding spirit, the silence was sharp enough to cut. Targeting solution locked, Park Hannah said, her fingers dancing over her screen. Their formation is tight. No evasive patterns. Captain Lee Min-woo watched the main viewer. They're not trying to dodge. They think we can't hurt them. Fire railguns. 2 magnetic rails along the ship's spine hummed with immense power. With a soundless flash, 2 tungsten slugs, each the size of a ground car, shot into the dark. They traveled at a fraction of the speed of light. In a normal space battle, such slow projectiles were useless. Shields deflected them. Ships moved out of the way. The Cathar did not move. Their shields, optimized to diffuse energy weapons, shimmered as the slugs hit. The shields held for a millisecond, then fractured like glass under a hammer. The slugs punched straight through, tearing into the lead ship's forward section. Chunks of hard chitin and soft, pulsing inner flesh exploded into the vacuum. The ship jerked, its smooth flight turning into a clumsy spin. A low-frequency click of shock and pain echoed across the comms, translated by the computer into a jarring digital screech. Kim Ta-yang whooped from the engineering station. They didn't see the rocks coming. The 2 remaining hunters reacted. They split apart, firing pulses of green bioplasma. The unyielding spirit shuddered as the first blast connected. The energy shields flared and died immediately, overloading. Alarms blared. Shields are down. Hannah yelled. Evasive pattern Hana. Minwoo ordered. Taiyang, reroute all non-essential power to thrusters and kinetic plating. Evasive pattern Hana was not in any compact manual. It was something Park Hana and the pilot had designed, based on old video feeds of Earth fighter jets and insect flight. The unyielding spirit did not glide or turn. It jerked. It spun on its axis, its main engines cutting in and out in bursts that would snap the bones of any other species. A bioplasma blast meant for its center missed by meters. The Cathar shooters paused, their targeting systems confused. The prey was moving in illogical, spasmodic ways. Inside the ship, the crew was strapped in, enduring crushing G-forces. Sergeant Kang Jun's voice came through the internal com steady. Marines are ready at all airlocks. They're going to try and board. I can feel it. He was right. The two hunter ships moved closer, ignoring their crippled sister. They extended long, bony boarding ramps, like giant stingers, aiming for the human ship's engine ports. Let them come, Minwoo said, his jaw tight. Then give them a welcome. The first ramp slammed into the unyielding spirit's hull with a deep, metallic groan. The Cathar warriors poured out. They were tall, with 4 arms ending in sharp, bony blades. Their faces were a nightmare of clicking mandibles and clusters of black eyes. They moved quickly, a flowing wave of claws and teeth. They burst into the main engineering bay, expecting panic, expecting soft bodies to cut apart. They found a kill zone. Sergeant Kang Jun and his 10 Marines were waiting, anchored behind welded metal barriers. They did not have energy rifles. They had projectile weapons. The roar of gunfire filled the metal room, a sound the Cathar had never heard. Tungsten-tipped rounds ripped through their chitinous armor. It was not the clean puncture of a plasma bolt. It was a savage tearing. The first wave of warriors fell, their limbs shattered, greenish fluid spraying, like more came. They were fast, climbing on the walls and ceiling. A Marine screamed as a bladed arm speared through his chest. Dr. Song Ji-eun, who had insisted on being in the medical bay nearby, heard it over the comms. She didn't flinch. She had been studying the scans. June. Their primary visual cluster is on the front, but they have vibration sensors on their lower joints. The floor. Kang Jun understood immediately. Grenades. On the deck. Shake their legs out from under them. Small, round grenades rolled across the floor. Not plasma grenades, but simple concussive charges. They exploded. The shock waves traveled through the deck plating. The Cathar warriors, sensitive to vibration for hive communication, stumbled, their coordination broken. The Marines fired again, cutting them down. On the bridge, the situation was dire. One hunter ship had latched on, trying to chew through the hull. The other was circling for another blast. Taiyang, I need an idea now. Minwoo shouted over the noise. The engineer was covered in sweat, looking at a system schematic. They're ships. They're partly alive, right? They have nervous systems. Our port-side maneuvering thrusters are wrecked. The fuel line is severed, just spewing chemical plasma. If I ignite it and angle the ship just right, do it. With a series of commands, Taiyang turned a disaster into a weapon. He sealed the port-side corridor and sent a power surge into the leaking fuel. A jet of raw burning plasma shot out from the side of the unyielding spirit, not as a weapon, but as a thruster. The human ship spun violently. The flaming plasma jet swept across the side of the attached Cathar boarding ship. The living hull cooked and blistered. The ship recoiled, tearing its boarding ramp free in a shower of debris. The other circling ship was hit by the unyielding spirit's wild spin, its hull crunching against the human ship's heavy kinetic armor. The fight was not a victory. It was a brutal, messy brawl. The unyielding spirit was badly wounded. One railgun was offline. There were holes in the hull. 20 crew members were dead, including 5 Marines, but the 3 Cathar hunters were broken. One drifted dead. The other 2, trailing fluids and missing limbs, were retreating, crawling back towards their main swarm. On the bridge, the crew breathed heavily. Smoke hung in the air. Park Hannah looked at her scans. They're pulling back. All of them. The main swarm is changing course. They're leaving. Minwoo wiped a cut on his forehead. They're not leaving. They're reassessing. We're not prey anymore. We're a problem. In the depths of a Cathar hive mind, a new signal was propagating. The data from the hunters flowed through the collective consciousness. The calculations were unclear. The target's defenses were weak but unpredictable. Its weapons were primitive but caused disproportionate damage. Its soldiers did not break. They funneled the attackers into traps. The target used sonic vibrations, chemical fire, and kinetic impacts in a chaotic mix. A new classification was slowly forming. Not biomass, harvestable, but threat, pattern unrecognized. And a secondary, more disturbing calculation began: the energy cost of consuming this strange, spiky prey might be higher than the nutritional value it provided. It was the first time such an equation had ever been run. Back on the unyielding spirit, Dr. Song Ji-eun studied the tissue samples a Marine had recovered from a dead warrior. She looked at the genetic structure, the way the cells communicated. She called the bridge. "Captain," she said, her voice quiet but intense. "I've been looking at their biology. They're a hive. They adapt by consuming and adding useful traits to their own gene pool. It's a perfect, efficient system." "It doesn't seem weak to me," Minwoo replied, exhausted. "It's too perfect," Ji-eun said. "They have no immune system. Not like we do. They've never needed one. They consume, they assimilate, they clean. They don't get sick. They've never faced something that fought back on a biological level." A dark idea, born in the quiet of a medical lab, began to take root. The predators had just felt humanity's fist. Soon, they might learn about its fever. The great hall on the planet Illyria was a masterpiece of peace. Its walls were made of a crystal that softened the light from the 2 suns, and a gentle, sweet scent hung in the air. But today, the air was thick with fear. The leaders of the Galactic Compact sat around a wide circular table. There were the Illyrians, tall and slender like reeds, their large eyes clouded with sadness. Next to them were the Grawn, built like stones, their gray skin marked with old scars. A handful of other species were there too, each one silent. The central hologram showed a star map. One by one, lights were blinking out. A green light for a thriving world would turn a sickly yellow as the Cathar Armada arrived, and then, finally, to a dead, flat gray. The most recent was Lyria Prime, an agricultural world. The last transmission had been brief, the sky darkening with drop pods, the screaming, and then static. "The shield projectors are useless," a Grand warlord named Orvan said, his voice like grinding rocks. "They adapt. They find the frequency and push through. Our energy weapons are drained by their hulls," an Illyrian minister whispered, her delicate fingers trembling. "They absorb the plasma, use it to grow their ships. We feed them by fighting them." A feeling of complete helplessness filled the room. This was how it had been for cycles. The Cathar were not just enemies. They were a force of nature, a devouring swarm. They did not communicate. They did not bargain. They arrived, They consumed all organic matter, and they left a dead rock. Their technology was a strange mix of the organic and the mechanical, and they learned from every battle, adapting at a terrifying speed. Borvan slammed a heavy fist on the table, making the crystal chime. We have thrown everything at them. Our combined fleets, our greatest weapons. They see it all coming. Our strategies are predictable. To them, we are just arranging our own bodies on a plate for their feast. The minister nodded, a gesture of deep defeat. The analysis is correct. The Cathar hive mind processes our tactics as a simple equation. Shield strength, weapon output, fleet formation. They solve the equation, and then they consume the answer. The silence that followed was heavier than any before. It was the silence of a verdict being accepted. The compact was finished. Illyria would be the last course. Then, Orvan's eyes, deep set under a bony ridge, glanced at a secondary screen. A minor data point. A footnote in galactic records. What about the newcomers? The ones from the third planet of the Sol system? A few delegates shifted. The Illyrian minister blinked. The humans? They only made first contact a few cycles ago. They are primitive, fragmented into hundreds of tribes. They only just got off their own planet with the warp drive schematics we shared. They are too biological. Another delegate, a scientist with feathery frills, added. No unified field theory. Their strongest weapons are kinetic. They throw pieces of metal. They use chemical explosions. It is technology from a bygone age. Exactly, Orvan growled. It is old. It is simple. The Cathar have never seen it. Their entire understanding of war is based on us, on our technology. What if the unpredictability of these humans is not a weakness, but a weapon? The idea was absurd. Sending a child with a stick to fight a forest fire. But the forest fire was at their door. The minister finally sighed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. We have no other option. Send the distress signal. On all frequencies. Direct it to Sol. Let us see if this young, angry species is foolish enough to answer. Deep in space, the Earth defense ship Unyielding Spirit moved quietly. It was humanity's first and only true interstellar vessel, a patchwork of gleaming titanium and carbon nanotube weave. Its design was a mix of borrowed compact technology and human stubbornness. It had energy shields, but they were unreliable. It had plasma cannons, but they overheated. Its real strength was a thick armor plate and massive, old-fashioned railguns that ran the length of its hull. On the bridge, Captain Lee Minwoo watched the stars. He was a man with a calm face, but his eyes were always moving, always assessing. He had been an ocean ship captain before this, and the dark silence of space felt similar to the deep sea full of hidden dangers. Signal incoming. Captain, said First Officer Park Hana. Her voice was crisp and clear. She was younger than Minwoo, brilliant with computers and languages, both human and alien. It's a repeat. Type beam from the galactic compact core worlds. It's a distress call. Put it on speaker, Minwoo said. The audio that filled the bridge was choppy, filled with static and translated by the ship's computer into cold, formal English. Cathar swarm. Illyria threatened. Total consumption. Any assistance? Final stand. The message repeated, and underneath the words, they could hear it. The raw edge of panic. The bridge crew was silent. Engineer Kim Tai-yang, who was on the bridge checking a power relay, whistled softly. He was usually covered in smudges of grease, a man who trusted his hands more than any computer. Sounds like a party. A bad one. Sergeant Kang Jun, a solid, serious man who led the ship's marine detachment, crossed his arms. The compact has fleets. Big ones. If they're begging, the threat is real. Minwoo knew the debates raging on Earth. Some said to hide, to build deeper bunkers, to hope the storm passed. Others, a louder group, said that a predator who eats your neighbors will not stop. It will get hungry again. He had been in that second group. Plot a course to the source of that signal, Minwoo said, his voice quiet but firm. Not to Illyria. To the edge of the conflict zone. We will observe. We are not heroes. We are scouts. We need to see this enemy with our own eyes. The unyielding spirit turned, its engines glowing. It slipped into the strange, warped state of faster-than-light travel, heading towards the darkness. Weeks later, they found their first evidence. It was a debris field where a compact trading post had been. There were no bodies, not even bones. The Gran and Illyrian metals were twisted and torn, but everything organic was gone. Scoured away, Dr. Song Ji-yun, the ship's xenobiologist, examined the scans from her lab. Her usual cheerful curiosity was gone, replaced by a clinical horror. The scans show residual digestive enzymes. Extremely potent, eh? Liquefy everything. Plant, animal, microbe. Then they suck it all up. It is not war. It is harvest. The mood on the ship turned grim. This was not an enemy you could reason with. This was an enemy that saw you as food dot. It was Park Hannah who picked up the signal first. A low-frequency pulse, like a heartbeat made of clicks. It was getting stronger. Captain, inbound contact. Multiple contacts. Emerging from warp near the fifth planet's orbit. Their signature matches the Cathar profiles in the compact database. On the main viewer, space rippled. Ships emerged. They were not sleek or geometric. They looked grown, not built. They were dark, chitinous, like enormous insects or crustaceans, covered in spikes and pulsing with a faint, sickly green light from within. They moved with a terrible, unified purpose. Battle stations, Minwoo said, his heart pounding. Shields up. Power to railguns. Do not fire. Let's see what they do. The Cathar Armada, a dozen vessels each larger than the unyielding spirit, ignored the gas giant and its moons. They turned as one. They had seen the human ship. A scan, visible as a flicker of red light, washed over the unyielding spirit. On the bridge, the computer chimed. Analysis complete, Hannah reported, her face pale. They are classifying us. Scanning for shield frequency, energy weapon signatures. Kim Taeyang snorted from his station. Joke's on them. Our shields are at 40% and fading, and half our plasma conduits are patched with polymer sealant. The Cathar ships paused. To their hive mind, the human vessel was a confusing read. Its energy signature was weak and messy. Its weapons did not match known profiles. It was small. It was alone. The calculation was simple. It was not a threat. It was merely another piece of biomass, hiding in a slightly harder shell. 3 of the smaller Cathar ships broke from the main group. They accelerated, not with the precise vectors of compact ships, but with a swift, predatory lunge. They were coming to crack the shell and consume the meat inside. Minwoo looked at his crew. He saw fear, but underneath it, a hard determination. These were humans. They did not like being called food. Sergeant Kang, he said, prepare boarding defenses. Hannah, target the lead ship's forward limbs with the railguns. Taeyang, give me everything you've got to the engines on my mark. Let's show them our teeth. The unyielding spirit, a tiny speck against the living armada, turned to face the hunters. The galactic predators thought nothing could defeat them. They were about to meet something they did not understand. They were about to meet humanity, and humanity was ready to fight.